Hey everybody and welcome back. This video is titled Dog Won't Leave Dealership, Salesman Checks Trunk. I have a strange feeling about this. It looked at him with huge, watery eyes and a growling belly. He tried to shoo it away, but the soggy dog wouldn't budge. There was only one way to take care of this problem, and he hoped he wouldn't regret it. For Hyundai manager Merson Mariano, seeing stray pets roaming the street was nothing new. In fact, there were so many in Brazil that they had an unofficial name, community pets. For the most part, he ignored their wide eyes and moaned for food. To others, this might have made him sound heartless. The truth was a lot more complicated. Mariano had nothing but compassion for these animals. But he had already adopted two, and it was all he could afford to keep. With over 30 million more out there, he was at the limit for how he could help. So, when one soaking, shivering dog set himself on the dealership steps, he was at a loss. If he fed it, it would stay. A large part of him worried if the dog would be aggressive to anyone trying to get in, or at least bother them. The plan was to just ignore the dog until it understood it had to find help somewhere else. But then something strange happened. The doggo refused to move. Before we continue, if you like this video, please like, comment, or subscribe. We'd greatly appreciate it. Now back to the video. He would plant himself on the front steps and sit there happily, only leaving to search for scraps of food. Even after shooing him away, he would only return, plop himself down, and wag his tail with weak enthusiasm. Mariano groaned in defeat and let the shaggy boy inside. At least they could give him a few days of recuperation, then send him on his way. Mariano rushed to check his car trunk and see if there was a blanket they could wrap him in. But the morning shift had started, and other employees started to arrive. That was the first step in a series of unbelievable events. When one customer walked in with their own dog, they all held their breath. Mariano couldn't help but chuckle as the two canines became fast friends. He followed them around with the salesman as if he was in training himself, sniffing his favorite cars. The man asked Mariano whose dog it was, and he explained that he was a stray. But the customer suddenly took another look at the large, brown dog with a strange expression on his face. Then, he began to shake his head. Mariano had no idea what was going on, but something had come over the man. He began to shake until he broke down. Tears rolled down his face. Mariano was shocked and bewildered. He asked the customer if he was okay, but the man just kept apologizing. Although Mariano had worked at the dealership for 7 years, he never had to deal with anything like this before. What had happened? Mariano, not really knowing what to do, got the man a glass of water and pulled up a chair. After a few minutes, the man had composed himself enough to give Mariano an explanation for his strange behavior. The man had gone through a lot in the last few weeks. The dog, he explained, was the straw that broke the camel's back. Then, he told Mariano an incredible story. The pain of his loss had gnawed at him for weeks. He had been dealing with his mother's estate as best he could, packing all her things up in boxes and giving them to charity. All that was left was her car. Just that morning, as he drove to the dealership, he'd asked for a sign. You see, the man's mother, Rose, had owned a dog who looked just like the stray in the car dealership. But the strange string of coincidences didn't end there. That dog had been his mother's whole world when her husband passed away. And when she'd rescued him, she had no idea that he'd rescue her in return. The man told Mariano that the dog had been found on the streets, and the staff members at the shelter had been unsure of exactly how old he was or what background he had come from. The only thing they did know was that the dog never made a sound. And that had suited his elderly mother just fine. After her husband passed, she had moved to an apartment block, and the last thing she needed was complaining neighbors. That's when the man's story took an unexpected turn. One night, his mother had gone to bed early because her head was pounding. She had checked on the dog and fallen asleep. But she had been blissfully unaware that there was something amiss. Something had changed. Only the rescue dog had known that something was very wrong. The next day, it was all over the news. His mother's apartment had caught fire and burned to the ground that night. But that dog that she'd rescued that very day had woken Rose up just in time. If it wasn't for that dog, Rose would have lost her life. The dog lived happily with Rose for another 8 years before he passed from old age. But the strangest part of the story was the dog's name. The strangest coincidence was that Mariano's stray was, right now, standing beside a particular model of Hyundai on the dealership floor, a Tucson Prime. Stranger still, the man insisted that Mariano came outside with him to look inside his trunk so that he knew he wasn't crazy. And there it was, in one of the boxes from his late mom's house, a blue collar and a metal tag with the name Tucson engraved on it. Mariano couldn't believe his eyes. Mariano was so moved by the stranger's story that he knew he had to do something. Unfortunately, even though it seemed like it was meant to be, the customer couldn't take the stray dog because he already had 3 of his own. But Mariano knew now that fate had brought this dog to the dealership for a reason. Suddenly, a wonderful, perfect light bulb went off in Mariano's head. Hyundai had always said they were a pet-friendly company. Why not put words into action? So, he rushed to his computer, feeling a surge of excitement. The email was simple, begging the higher-ups to let the dealership adopt the dog and make it their official mascot. All he wanted was a yes, but he got so much more than he would ever have dreamed of. Not only did they say it was a great idea, but they wanted the store to become the dog's forever home. They also sent a check to buy all the necessary products and get him checked by a vet. In addition, they would set up a camera to keep an eye on him when no one was there. But there were still 2 vital things missing, and they couldn't be overlooked any longer. First, he needed a name. It didn't take long for the entire team to agree on Tucson Prime. After all, it seemed like a sign. The giddiness of the event made Mariano rush to his computer and print out Tucson, his very own employee badge. One would think the story would end there, but it gets so much better. Through the dealership's Instagram, word of Tucson spread like wildfire. People started sending in gifts, giggling over his video baths, and cooing when he walked customers around or went on a test drive with them. People actually started coming to the store just to see the new mascot. Soon, their dog got an amazing invitation. It was something even Mariano had never received, an invitation to visit the actual Hyundai plants. The big bosses and their staff wanted a meet and greet. Their dealership went crazy. They bought various ties and bow ties, a new leash, and whatever else would leave the best impression. Mariano beamed with pride as he led Tucson around the plant floor, and workers raced and squealed with joy to give him belly rubs. Their professional consultant had already won over the hearts of the bosses, but the marketing team looked like excited children when they gave Mariano another unbelievable offer. They wanted to make Tucson part of a new set of nationwide commercials. His scruffy boy was going to be famous. After then arrived back to the dealership, and their doggo settled into his custom doghouse and fell immediately asleep, Mariano shook his head in awe at everything that had happened. All it had taken was a little bit of kindness. Their group band together for the sole purpose of saving one street dog, but they ended up bringing so much joy to so many people around the world. He couldn't wait to see what the future brought. That's the end of this video. Thank you for watching. As always, if you like this video, please like, comment, or subscribe, and we'll see you in our next video.